The morning mist hung thick over Windsor Castle as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell began his routine patrol of the East Wing. 23 years of service had taught him to notice everything, from loose stones in the ancient walls to shadows that fell where they shouldn't, but nothing had prepared him for what he would witness on this particular Tuesday in October. Thomas walked the familiar corridors with measured steps, his polished boots echoing against the marble floors. The early hour meant the palace was mostly quiet, with only essential staff moving about their duties. He had always preferred these peaceful moments before the castle came fully alive with its daily bustle of ceremonies, meetings, and royal obligations. As he turned the corner toward the Queen's former private quarters, something caught his eye. A figure moved quietly through the hallway ahead, carrying what appeared to be a small wooden box. The person wore a dark coat and moved with purpose, but there was something secretive about their manner that made Thomas pause behind a marble pillar. His training kicked in immediately. Anyone moving through these restricted areas at this hour should have been accompanied by proper security clearance. The Queen's private rooms had been sealed since her passing, accessible only to a handful of senior palace officials and members of the immediate royal family. Thomas squinted through the dim lighting, trying to identify the figure. As the person moved closer to one of the tall windows, a shaft of morning sunlight illuminated their face. His breath caught in his throat. It was Queen Camilla, but she was alone and clearly trying to avoid detection. The wooden box in her hands was ornate, with what appeared to be intricate gold inlays catching the light. Thomas had seen similar items in the palace's treasure rooms during his security briefings. These were the kinds of pieces that required special handling and were never moved without proper documentation and escort. Camilla paused at a doorway, looking both ways down the corridor before producing a key from her coat pocket. Thomas watched in stunned silence as she unlocked a door that he knew led to one of the late Queen's private storage rooms. The same rooms that had been officially sealed pending the completion of the estate's inventory. His mind raced with questions. Why was the Queen consort here alone? Why wasn't she accompanied by the usual security detail? And most importantly, what was in that wooden box and where was she taking it? Thomas had to make a split-second decision. His duty was clear. Report any unusual activity regardless of who was involved. But this wasn't just anyone. This was a member of the royal family, and accusing her of wrongdoing without absolute certainty could end his career and cause a scandal that would rock the monarchy. He decided to document what he was seeing. Carefully, he pulled out his phone and began taking photos, making sure to capture clear images of Camilla with the wooden box. The timestamp would prove when this occurred, and the metadata would confirm the location within the palace. Camilla emerged from the room after about 10 minutes, but now she was empty-handed. The wooden box was nowhere to be seen. She locked the door behind her and began walking back toward the main corridor, her movements still cautious and deliberate. Thomas waited until she was completely out of sight before approaching the door she had used. He tried the handle, but it was locked tight. The brass nameplate beside the door read, "Private collection storage, authorized personnel only." This was definitely one of the rooms that should have been off limits. The weight of what he had witnessed began to settle on his shoulders. In all his years of service, Thomas had never faced a situation like this. He had always prided himself on his integrity and his dedication to protecting the royal family and their possessions. But now he found himself in an impossible position. He spent the rest of his patrol in deep thought, mechanically checking the remaining areas while his mind churned over the implications of what he had seen. By the time he returned to the security office, he had made his decision. Thomas sat at his desk and began typing his incident report. He kept the language professional and factual, describing exactly what he had observed without making accusations or drawing conclusions. He attached the photos he had taken, ensuring they were properly time-stamped and documented. His supervisor, Captain James Harrison, arrived for the morning briefing just as Thomas was finishing his report. James was a veteran of 30 years in royal protection, a man known for his discretion and sound judgment. "Morning, Thomas. Anything unusual on the night patrol?" James asked routinely, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Thomas hesitated for just a moment before handing over his report. "Sir, I need you to review this immediately. It's sensitive." James took the papers and began reading, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he reached the photographs, his face went pale. He looked up at Thomas with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Are you absolutely certain about what you're reporting here?" James asked quietly. "Yes, sir. I saw it with my own eyes and documented everything as it happened." James closed the file and locked it in his desk drawer. "This doesn't leave this room until I decide how to proceed. You've done the right thing by reporting it, but we need to handle this very carefully." The implications were staggering. If a member of the royal family was indeed moving items from the late Queen's sealed collection, without proper authorization, it could constitute theft, regardless of their position. The royal family's reputation, already under scrutiny from various quarters, could suffer irreparable damage. James knew he had to escalate this immediately, but to whom? The normal chain of command seemed inadequate for such a delicate situation. This required someone with the authority to investigate discreetly while maintaining the confidentiality that royal matters demanded. Meanwhile, Thomas returned to his duties, but the morning's events weighed heavily on his mind. He had always believed in doing the right thing no matter the consequences. But as the day progressed, he began to understand that his simple act of reporting suspicious activity had set in motion something much larger than he had anticipated. The palace continued its normal operations around him, staff members going about their daily routines, tourists being guided through public areas, and officials conducting their business. None of them knew that beneath this facade of normalcy, a crisis was beginning to unfold that would soon challenge the very foundations of trust within the royal household. As evening approached, Thomas completed his shift, knowing that tomorrow would bring questions he wasn't sure he was prepared to answer. He had opened a door that could never be closed again, and the consequences would ripple through the palace in ways he was only beginning to understand. Captain James Harrison spent the entire night reviewing Thomas Mitchell's report and photographs. The evidence was clear and disturbing, but the implications required careful consideration. By dawn, he had made the difficult decision to contact Sir Edward Pemberton, the Lord Chamberlain, who oversaw the royal household's operations and would know how to handle such a delicate matter. Sir Edward arrived at the palace earlier than usual that morning, his face grave as he was briefed on the situation. A distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, he had served the royal family for over 2 decades and had never encountered anything quite like this. "Show me everything," Sir Edward commanded as he settled into James's office. James spread out the photographs and incident report across his desk. Sir Edward studied each image carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. The timestamps were clear, the location was confirmed, and the figure in the photographs was unmistakably Queen Camilla. "The wooden box," Sir Edward murmured, pointing to one of the clearer images. "I recognize that design. It's from the late Queen's personal jewelry collection, 18th century craftsmanship, probably worth a considerable sum even without considering its contents." Sir Edward leaned back in his chair, weighing his options. Protocol demanded that any suspected theft be reported to the authorities immediately, but this was no ordinary case. Accusing a member of the royal family of stealing from the late Queen's estate could trigger a constitutional crisis. "We need to verify what's missing before we proceed," Sir Edward decided. "I want a complete inventory of that storage room conducted immediately, but with absolute discretion. Only the most trusted staff members are to be involved." James nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What about Sergeant Mitchell? He's asking questions about when he might be called for additional statements." "Sergeant Mitchell is to continue his normal duties, but is not to discuss this matter with anyone. Make that in direct order. The fewer people who know about this, the better we can control the situation." Within hours, Sir Edward had assembled a small team of the palace's most experienced and trusted staff members. Margaret Thornfield, the chief curator of royal collections, was brought in to conduct the inventory. A meticulous woman in her 50s, Margaret had overseen the cataloging of royal treasures for 15 years and knew every significant piece in the collection. The team entered the storage room that afternoon, under the pretense of conducting routine maintenance checks. Margaret brought her detailed inventory lists and began methodically comparing them to what was actually present in the room. It didn't take long to discover the problem. 3 items were missing from their designated locations: the ornate wooden jewelry box Thomas had photographed, a small silver tea service that had belonged to Queen Victoria, and a pearl necklace that had been a wedding gift to the late Queen from her grandmother. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she made notes of the missing items. The total value was substantial, but more importantly, these were pieces of irreplaceable historical significance. The jewelry box alone contained several rare gems that had been in the royal collection for over 2 centuries. "Sir Edward," Margaret whispered as they concluded the inventory. "These items were specifically mentioned in the late Queen's will. They were designated to be preserved in the royal collection permanently. They should never have been removed from this room." Sir Edward felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but he still needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. Was this an isolated incident, or were there other items missing from other locations? He authorized Margaret to discreetly check several other storage areas that housed the late Queen's personal effects. Over the next 2 days, the secret inventory revealed a disturbing pattern. Small but valuable items were missing from multiple locations, all pieces that would be easy to transport and difficult to trace. Meanwhile, Thomas Mitchell continued his regular patrols, but he found himself paying closer attention to any unusual activity in the palace corridors. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something told him that what he had witnessed was not an isolated incident. His suspicions were confirmed 3 days later when he observed Camilla again, this time in a different section of the palace. She was carrying a small velvet pouch and moving with the same secretive manner he had noted before. This time she entered a room that Thomas knew contained historical documents and smaller artifacts from the royal archives. Once again, Thomas documented what he saw, taking careful photographs and noting the exact time and location. When Camilla emerged 20 minutes later, the velvet pouch was no longer in her possession. The pattern was becoming clear, and Thomas knew he had to report this new incident immediately. He found Captain Harrison in the security office and handed over his second report with a heavy heart. James read the new report with growing alarm. The situation was escalating, and they could no longer treat this as an isolated incident. He immediately contacted Sir Edward, who arrived within the hour looking haggard and deeply concerned. "We have a serious problem," Sir Edward announced as he reviewed Thomas's latest evidence. "The inventory has revealed multiple missing items, and now we have documentation of ongoing suspicious activity." The 3 men sat in tense silence, each understanding that they were witnessing something that could destroy the monarchy's reputation, if not handled correctly. The evidence was mounting, but taking action against a sitting member of the royal family required extraordinary justification and careful planning. Sir Edward made another difficult decision. "We need to involve someone with higher authority. This has gone beyond what we can handle at the household level." He placed a secure call to Sir Marcus Whitmore, the private secretary to the king, a position that made him one of the most powerful people in the royal establishment. Sir Marcus had served in this role for over a decade and was known for his ability to handle crises with discretion and efficiency. The conversation was brief but intense. Sir Marcus listened to the details without interruption, asking only a few pointed questions about the evidence and the security of the investigation. "I'll be there within the hour," Sir Marcus concluded. "Ensure that nothing else is discussed about this matter until I arrive. We're entering very dangerous territory." As they waited for Sir Marcus's arrival, Thomas found himself reflecting on how quickly his simple observation had grown into something much larger. He had always prided himself on his duty and integrity, but he was beginning to understand that sometimes doing the right thing came with consequences he hadn't anticipated. The palace around him continued its normal operations, tourists and staff going about their business, unaware that in the security offices, a crisis was unfolding that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. The late Queen's treasures, items that represented centuries of royal history and tradition, were disappearing one by one, and all evidence pointed to someone who should have been their most trusted guardian. Sir Marcus's arrival would mark the beginning of a new phase in the investigation, one that would require decisions about loyalty, duty, and justice that would test everyone involved. The time for simple security reports and quiet inventories was coming to an end. Sir Marcus Whitmore arrived at Windsor Castle exactly 1 hour after his phone conversation with Sir Edward Pemberton. A tall, imposing man with graying temples and an air of quiet authority, Sir Marcus had navigated numerous royal crises during his tenure as private secretary to the king. However, none had been quite as potentially devastating as this one. The meeting took place in Sir Edward's private office, with only the core team present: Sir Marcus, Sir Edward, Captain Harrison, and Sergeant Mitchell. The atmosphere was tense as Sir Marcus reviewed all the evidence that had been gathered over the past few days. "Gentlemen," Sir Marcus began after studying the photographs and inventory reports, "we are facing a situation that could fundamentally damage the monarchy's reputation. However, we must proceed with absolute caution and ensure that every step we take is legally sound and morally justified." Thomas Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Being in a room with such high-ranking officials discussing a member of the royal family made him acutely aware of the magnitude of what he had set in motion with his initial report. Sir Marcus turned to Thomas directly. "Sergeant Mitchell, your vigilance and professionalism in documenting these incidents has been exemplary. However, I need you to understand that what we discuss in this room today cannot leave these walls under any circumstances. The security of the realm may depend on our discretion." "I understand, sir," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. Sir Marcus continued, "We need to determine the full extent of what's missing and establish whether this is personal acquisition or something else entirely. There could be explanations we haven't considered yet." Margaret Thornfield was called back to provide a comprehensive report on her inventory findings. She entered the office carrying several thick folders containing detailed lists and photographs of the missing items. "The situation is worse than we initially thought," Margaret reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've now confirmed that 17 items are missing from various storage locations. The total estimated value exceeds £2 million, but more importantly, these are irreplaceable pieces of royal heritage." She spread out photographs of the missing items across the conference table. Each piece told a story of royal history: a diamond brooch worn by Queen Victoria at her coronation, a set of sapphire earrings gifted by the Russian Tsar, ancient coins from the reign of Henry VIII, and numerous other treasures that had been carefully preserved for generations. "What's particularly troubling," Margaret continued, "is that whoever is taking these items has detailed knowledge of the collection. They're selecting pieces that are valuable but not so famous that their absence would be immediately noticed during casual inspections." Sir Marcus studied the photographs carefully. "This suggests planning and intimate knowledge of the royal collection. It's not random theft but rather calculated selection." Captain Harrison spoke up. "Sir, we've also noticed that the storage areas being accessed require specific keys and security codes. The person responsible has high-level access to restricted areas of the palace." The implications hung heavy in the air. The evidence was pointing increasingly towards someone with insider knowledge and authorized access to the most secure areas of the royal residences. Sir Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. "We need to set up surveillance on the areas where the thefts have occurred. If this is ongoing, we need to catch the perpetrator in the act with irrefutable evidence." "Sir," Sir Edward interjected carefully, "if our suspicions are correct about who's involved, surveillance could be seen as doing our job," Sir Marcus finished firmly. "The crown jewels and royal treasures belong to the nation, not to any individual, regardless of their position. If someone is stealing from the collection, they must be stopped, whoever they are." Over the next 2 days, a discreet surveillance system was installed in the key areas where thefts had occurred. Hidden cameras were positioned to capture anyone entering or leaving the storage rooms, and motion sensors were placed to alert security staff to any unauthorized access. Thomas continued his regular patrols, but now he was part of a larger operation. He carried a discreet radio that would alert him immediately if any of the monitored areas showed activity. The weight of responsibility felt heavier with each passing hour. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening. Thomas was conducting his routine patrol when his radio crackled to life. "Movement detected in Archive Storage Room C," came the whispered message from the monitoring station. Thomas's heart raced as he made his way toward the location, moving carefully to avoid detection. He coordinated with 2 other security officers who were positioning themselves at alternative exits to ensure no one could leave unobserved. As Thomas approached the storage room, he could see light coming from under the door. Someone was definitely inside, using a flashlight to avoid triggering the main lighting system. He positioned himself where he could observe the exit while remaining hidden behind a marble column. After about 15 minutes, the light disappeared and Thomas heard the distinctive sound of a lock being engaged. The door opened slowly, and a figure emerged carrying what appeared to be a small package wrapped in dark cloth. Even in the dim corridor lighting, Thomas immediately recognized Queen Camilla. She moved with the same cautious manner he had observed before, checking both directions before proceeding toward a side exit that led to the private royal apartments. This time, Thomas was ready. The surveillance cameras would have captured everything, providing the irrefutable evidence that Sir Marcus had demanded. But seeing it happen again, knowing what it meant, still sent a chill through him. He followed at a safe distance, documenting Camilla's route and noting the time she entered the private residential area, where his security clearance did not allow him to follow. The entire incident had been captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by a trained security professional. Within an hour, Sir Marcus, Sir Edward, and Captain Harrison were reviewing the surveillance footage in a secure room. The images were clear and unambiguous. Queen Camilla was indeed removing items from the royal collection without authorization. "We have our proof," Sir Marcus said quietly, his face grave. "The question now is what we do with it." The room fell silent as each man contemplated the enormity of the situation. They had documented a sitting member of the royal family stealing from the royal collection. The legal, constitutional, and public relations implications were staggering. Sir Edward was the first to speak. "We have a duty to report this to the appropriate authorities, but we also have a duty to protect the monarchy as an institution." "The two duties may not be compatible," Sir Marcus replied. "But we cannot allow theft to continue regardless of who's responsible." Thomas listened to the discussion with growing unease. He had done his job by reporting suspicious activity, but he was beginning to understand that the consequences would extend far beyond simple criminal charges. This was about the future of the royal family itself. Sir Marcus stood up, indicating that the meeting was concluded. "I need to brief His Majesty immediately." This decision ultimately rests with the king. As the officials filed out of the room, Thomas remained behind, staring at the surveillance monitors that continued to show empty corridors. Tomorrow would bring conversations and decisions that would change the course of the monarchy. And it had all started with his simple observation during a routine patrol. The palace around him continued its ancient rhythms, but beneath the surface, a crisis was building that would test every principle the royal family claimed to represent. The morning after the surveillance breakthrough, Sir Marcus Whitmore faced the most difficult briefing of his career. King Charles III was scheduled to meet with him at 8 a.m. in the king's private study at Buckingham Palace. The weight of what he had to reveal pressed heavily on Sir Marcus's shoulders as he prepared for a conversation that could reshape the monarchy. Sir Marcus arrived early, reviewing his notes one final time. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs, surveillance footage, inventory reports, and eyewitness testimony from a respected security officer. There was no room for doubt about what Queen Camilla had been doing. King Charles entered his study precisely at 8 o'clock, as was his habit. At 74, he had waited decades to become king, and had spent his entire life preparing for the responsibilities of the crown. Nothing, however, had prepared him for what he was about to hear about his own wife. "Good morning, Marcus," the king said, settling into his chair. "I understand this is a matter of some urgency." "Your Majesty," Sir Marcus began carefully, "I have information that I must share with you regarding Queen Camilla and certain items from the royal collection." The king's expression grew serious immediately. "Please proceed." Sir Marcus laid out the evidence methodically, starting with Sergeant Mitchell's initial observation and progressing through the inventory discoveries and surveillance footage. He watched as the king's face changed from concern to disbelief to something approaching anguish. When the presentation was complete, King Charles sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The implications of what he had just learned went far beyond simple theft. This was about trust, family, and the very foundations of his reign. "You're absolutely certain about this evidence?" the king finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Majesty. We have multiple confirmations and clear surveillance footage. There's no possibility of mistake." King Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. The morning sun was streaming through, but the brightness seemed to mock the darkness of the situation he now faced. What are my options, Marcus? Sir Marcus had anticipated this question and had spent considerable time consulting with legal experts and constitutional scholars. Your Majesty, legally we have clear evidence of theft. The items belong to the Crown Estate and the nation. However, the constitutional implications of charging the Queen Consort are unprecedented. The king turned back to face his private secretary. And if we do nothing? The theft will likely continue, and if it ever becomes public through other means, the scandal would be far worse than addressing it now. King Charles returned to his chair, looking older than his years. I need to speak with her directly before any decisions are made. Arrange for a private meeting this afternoon, but do not indicate the subject matter. Your Majesty, I must advise caution. If Queen Camilla knows she's been discovered, there's a risk she might attempt to dispose of evidence or claim items are missing. She's my wife, Marcus. Before she's Queen Consort, before any of this, she's my wife. I need to understand why this has happened. Sir Marcus nodded, understanding the king's position even as he worried about the implications. I'll arrange the meeting, but I recommend we first secure the remaining collection to prevent any further theft. Do it quietly, the king agreed. And Marcus, how many people know about this investigation? The core team consists of 5 individuals. Myself, Sir Edward Pemberton, Captain Harrison, Sergeant Mitchell, and Margaret Thornfield. All have been sworn to absolute secrecy. Keep it that way until we determine our course of action. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, the atmosphere had grown increasingly tense among the investigation team. Thomas Mitchell continued his regular patrols, but the knowledge of what he had uncovered weighed heavily on his mind. He found himself observing every member of the royal family with new eyes, wondering what other secrets might be hidden behind the facade of royal dignity. Margaret Thornfield worked with quiet efficiency to secure the remaining collection items, discreetly moving the most valuable pieces to more secure locations. She had dedicated her career to preserving royal heritage, and the thought that someone was systematically stealing these treasures left her feeling betrayed and heartbroken. Captain Harrison coordinated the enhanced security measures while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. The challenge was enormous. How do you protect the royal collection from a member of the royal family itself? That afternoon, Queen Camilla arrived at Buckingham Palace for her scheduled meeting with the king, unaware of the storm that was about to break over her. She entered the king's study with her usual confident manner, expecting to discuss upcoming royal engagements and charitable commitments. Camilla, please sit down, King Charles said, his formal tone immediately alerting her that something was amiss. Charles, you look troubled. What's wrong? She asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. The king struggled with how to begin. After 40 years of marriage, he thought he knew his wife completely. The evidence before him suggested otherwise. I've been informed of some very serious allegations regarding your activities at Windsor Castle, he began slowly. Camilla's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. What kind of allegations? King Charles picked up one of the surveillance photographs and placed it on the desk between them. The image clearly showed Camilla carrying the ornate wooden jewelry box from the late Queen's storage room. The silence stretched for nearly a minute as Camilla stared at the photograph. When she finally looked up, her face had gone pale. Where did this come from? She asked quietly. Palace security has been investigating missing items from my mother's collection. They have documented evidence of multiple thefts over the past several weeks. Camilla stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to the king. You had me followed? You put me under surveillance? Items were disappearing from secure storage areas. Security was doing their job. The king's voice remained steady, but the pain was evident. Camilla, I need you to explain what's happening. She turned back to face him, and for the first time in their marriage, King Charles saw something in his wife's eyes that frightened him. It wasn't guilt or shame, but rather a cold calculation that seemed completely foreign to the woman he thought he knew. The late Queen never appreciated what she had, Camilla said finally. Rooms full of treasures that no one ever sees, gathering dust while they could be bringing joy to people who would actually value them. The king felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. Those items belong to the nation, Camilla. They're held in trust for future generations. They're old trinkets locked away in storage rooms, she replied dismissively. I've been sharing some of them with people who can actually appreciate their beauty. Sharing them? King Charles leaned forward. You mean giving them away? Some I've given as gifts to friends who've shown me kindness over the years. Others I've sold to collectors who will treasure them properly. The magnitude of what she was admitting began to sink in. This wasn't impulsive theft, but a calculated redistribution of royal treasures that she felt entitled to control. Camilla, do you understand what you're saying? You're confessing to stealing millions of pounds worth of national treasures. She met his gaze directly, showing no remorse. I'm saying I've been putting beautiful objects in the hands of people who appreciate them instead of letting them rot in storage. King Charles realized that the woman sitting across from him was not the person he had thought he married. The crisis facing his reign was deeper and more personal than he had ever imagined possible. The confrontation between King Charles and Queen Camilla stretched into the afternoon, with neither yielding ground on their fundamental disagreement about the nature of royal treasures and their proper stewardship. The king sat in stunned silence as his wife detailed her activities with a matter-of-fact tone that chilled him to the bone. I gave the pearl necklace to Lady Pemberton for her daughter's wedding, Camilla continued, seemingly oblivious to her husband's horror. The child was so grateful, and it meant nothing sitting in that dreary storage room. The silver tea service went to the Worthington family auction for their children's charity. They raised thousands of pounds for orphans. King Charles struggled to process what he was hearing. Camilla, those weren't your possessions to give away. The pearl necklace alone is worth over 300,000 pounds, and it has historical significance dating back to Queen Mary. Historical significance to whom? Camilla demanded. To tourists who will never see it? To historians who only care about cataloging dead people's belongings? At least now it's bringing happiness to living people. The king realized that his wife's logic was fundamentally flawed, but her conviction was absolute. She genuinely believed she was performing acts of generosity rather than committing theft. What about the items you sold? He pressed. That can hardly be characterized as charitable giving. Camilla's expression hardened slightly. The money from those sales has gone to various causes I support. Private charities that don't receive enough public attention. Which charities? We need to account for every item and every transaction. I don't see why that's necessary, Camilla replied coldly. My charitable giving has always been private. King Charles felt the weight of his position crushing down on him. As monarch, he had a duty to uphold the law and protect national treasures. As a husband, he was facing the destruction of his marriage and everything he thought he knew about his wife. Camilla, you must understand that this cannot continue. These items need to be returned, and we need to address the legal implications of what you've done. Legal implications? Her voice took on a sharp edge. I'm the queen consort. These items are part of the royal collection, and I have every right to determine their best use. That's not how the law works, and you know it. The crown estate and royal collections are held in trust. No individual, not even the monarch, has the right to dispose of them for personal purposes. The meeting was interrupted by a discreet knock on the door. Sir Marcus Whitmore entered after being summoned, his face grave as he assessed the tension in the room. Your Majesty, Sir Marcus said carefully, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have urgent developments that require your immediate attention. King Charles looked between his wife and his private secretary, realizing that whatever news Sir Marcus brought would likely make an already impossible situation even worse. What is it, Marcus? We've identified the recipients of several missing items through our investigation. Some have contacted us directly after seeing news reports about increased security at royal residences. They're asking questions about the authenticity and legal ownership of items they received as gifts. Camilla's face went pale as the implications became clear. Her careful network of recipients was beginning to unravel. How many people have come forward? The king asked. 7 so far, but we expect more. Word is spreading among certain social circles that some valuable items may have been improperly distributed. King Charles turned to his wife. This is becoming public, Camilla. We're running out of time to handle this quietly. For the first time during their conversation, Queen Camilla seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. The confident demeanor she had maintained began to crack as she realized her actions were spiraling beyond her control. I never intended for any of this to become a scandal, she said. Quietly. Intent doesn't matter now, the king replied. We need to focus on damage control and making this right. Sir Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. Your Majesty, There are several urgent decisions that need to be made. First, do we begin legal proceedings to recover the missing items? Second, how do we handle the recipients who received items in good faith? And third, what action do we take regarding Queen Camilla's role in all of this? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Each decision would have profound implications for the monarchy's future and the royal family's reputation. King Charles stood and walked to his desk, where he picked up a secure telephone. "I need to speak with the Attorney General immediately." As he waited for the connection, he looked at his wife with a mixture of love and disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Camilla, I want you to understand something clearly. I love you, but I cannot and will not allow the monarchy to be destroyed by this situation. You will cooperate fully with whatever legal proceedings are necessary, and you will help us recover every single item that was taken." Queen Camilla met his gaze, and for a moment, her carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "Charles, I honestly thought I was doing good things with objects that were just gathering dust." "I believe you thought that," the king replied sadly. "But thinking something is right doesn't make it legal or ethical." The call connected, and King Charles began the most difficult conversation of his reign. He was about to inform the government's chief legal officer that his wife had been systematically stealing from the royal collection. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, Thomas Mitchell was dealing with his own crisis of conscience. Word had begun to spread among the palace staff that there was an ongoing investigation involving missing items. Though the details remained classified, the increased security measures and tense atmosphere made it clear that something significant was happening. Several of Thomas's colleagues had approached him with questions, knowing he was often involved in security briefings. The weight of keeping such a massive secret was beginning to affect his sleep and his ability to concentrate on his duties. Captain Harrison noticed the strain on his sergeant and called him into his office for a private conversation. "Thomas, I know this situation is difficult for you," Harrison began. "You've done exceptional work, but I can see it's taking a toll." "Sir, I keep thinking about what this means for everyone who works here," Thomas replied. "If this becomes public, how many jobs will be lost? How many people will be affected by something they had nothing to do with? Those are valid concerns, but remember that your job is to protect the royal collection and uphold the law." "You've done that admirably." Thomas nodded, but the conversation did little to ease his mind. He had spent his entire career believing in the dignity and honor of the royal family. Discovering that a member of that family was systematically stealing treasures had shaken his faith in everything he thought he understood about his service. Back at Buckingham Palace, the king's conversation with the Attorney General was reaching its conclusion. The legal implications were staggering, and the constitutional questions were unprecedented in modern British history. "Your Majesty," the Attorney General said through the secure line, "we have no choice but to begin formal proceedings. The evidence is overwhelming, and the value of the stolen items requires criminal charges." King Charles felt his world shifting beneath him. What about Queen Camilla's status? How do we handle charging a member of the royal family? "The law applies equally to everyone, Your Majesty. There are no exceptions for royal status in cases of theft. However, we can work with you on timing and procedures to minimize public disruption." After ending the call, the king turned to face his wife and Sir Marcus. The decision he was about to make would define his reign and possibly the future of the monarchy itself. "Camilla, you have a choice," he said slowly. "You can cooperate fully with the authorities, help recover every stolen item, and face the legal consequences of your actions. Or you can fight this and force a public trial that will destroy both of us and the institution we've sworn to serve." Queen Camilla looked at her husband with tears in her eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to take responsibility for what you've done and help us fix it before it destroys everything our family has worked to build." The room fell silent as everyone waited for her response. The future of the British monarchy hung in the balance, dependent on the decision of a woman who had convinced herself that stealing national treasures was an act of kindness. Sir Marcus watched the exchange with professional detachment, but privately he was calculating the various scenarios that could unfold from this moment. Each possibility carried enormous risks for the crown and the country. Finally, Queen Camilla spoke, her voice barely audible. "I'll cooperate, but I want it understood that I never intended to harm anyone or damage the monarchy." King Charles felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. Intent will be considered, but consequences still must be faced. The crisis had reached a turning point, but the hardest decision still lay ahead. The days following Queen Camilla's agreement to cooperate marked the beginning of the most intensive and secretive operation in modern royal history. A joint team of palace officials, legal experts, and law enforcement officers worked around the clock to trace every missing item and identify all recipients who had unknowingly received stolen royal treasures. Margaret Thornfield found herself at the center of this massive undertaking, her expertise crucial in identifying and valuing each missing piece. She worked from a secure office at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by detailed inventory lists, historical records, and photographs that documented decades of royal collecting. "The complexity is staggering," Margaret explained to Sir Marcus during one of their daily briefings. "Some items were given as gifts, others were sold through private dealers, and several were donated to institutions." Queen Camilla kept detailed records, which is both helpful and damaging. Indeed, Camilla's meticulous documentation of her activities painted a picture of someone who believed deeply in the righteousness of her actions. Her private journals, surrendered as part of her cooperation agreement, revealed a woman convinced that she was rescuing beautiful objects from neglect and putting them to better use. One entry read, "Gave the emerald brooch to Sarah Whitman today. She was so moved by its beauty and the story I told her about Queen Alexandra wearing it. Much better than sitting in a dusty box where no one appreciates it." Another entry detailed the sale of a rare coin collection. "Sold the Tudor coins to Dr. Harrison for his museum. The children will be able to see them and learn about history. This is what these treasures should do, educate and inspire, not gather dust in royal vaults." King Charles read these entries with a heavy heart, understanding for the first time how his wife had rationalized her actions. Her intentions, while misguided, came from a genuine belief that she was improving the world by redistributing royal wealth. The recovery operation proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Many recipients were cooperative once they understood the situation, returning items immediately with apologies for any inconvenience. However, others had already resold pieces or given them as gifts to additional parties, creating an expanding web of complications. Lord Pemberton, whose daughter had received the valuable pearl necklace, was among the first to contact the palace when rumors began circulating about missing royal items. "I had no idea the necklace wasn't Queen Camilla's to give," he told Sir Edward during a private meeting. "My daughter wore it on her wedding day. She's absolutely devastated to learn it was stolen property." Similar conversations were taking place across London's social circles as word spread discreetly among the aristocracy and wealthy collectors. The palace's strategy was to handle each case individually, emphasizing that recipients were victims rather than accomplices. However, not everyone was cooperative. Several private collectors who had purchased items through intermediaries demanded proof of theft before agreeing to return their acquisitions. This led to awkward legal negotiations and, in some cases, court orders to recover stolen property. Thomas Mitchell continued his regular duties at Windsor Castle, but the investigation had fundamentally changed his perspective on his role. He found himself questioning everything he had previously taken for granted about royal privilege and the boundaries of acceptable behavior. During one of his patrols, he encountered Prince William, who was visiting Windsor for a private meeting with palace officials about the ongoing crisis. The encounter was brief but telling. "Sergeant Mitchell," Prince William said, recognizing him from security briefings, "I understand we owe you a debt of gratitude for your vigilance in this matter." Thomas felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I was just doing my job, Your Royal Highness." "Sometimes doing one's job requires extraordinary courage," the prince replied. "The monarchy is stronger because of people like you who uphold their duties regardless of personal cost." The conversation left Thomas with mixed emotions. While he appreciated the recognition, he couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had contributed to tearing apart a family and potentially damaging an institution that millions of people revered. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings were moving forward with unprecedented secrecy. The Attorney General's office worked closely with palace officials to structure charges and procedures that would minimize public exposure while ensuring justice was served. Queen Camilla met regularly with her legal team, a group of the country's most experienced criminal defense attorneys who specialized in high-profile cases. The challenge they faced was unique, defending someone who had admitted to theft but claimed moral justification for her actions. "Your Majesty," her lead attorney explained during one session, "the prosecution is willing to consider a plea agreement that would involve full restitution, community service, and a suspended sentence. However, this would require a formal admission of guilt." Camilla struggled with the implications. A guilty plea would forever mark her as a convicted criminal, regardless of the sentence. However, fighting the charges would likely result in a public trial that could destroy the monarchy. "What does Charles think I should do?" she asked. "His Majesty has made it clear that he supports whatever decision you make, but he's also emphasized that the institution must come before personal considerations." The pressure was overwhelming. Camilla found herself increasingly isolated as former friends and allies distanced themselves from the scandal. Even palace staff who had served her loyally for years now treated her with professional courtesy rather than personal warmth. King Charles faced his own agonizing decisions about their marriage and her future role in the monarchy. The woman he loved had committed crimes that violated everything the royal family was supposed to represent. Yet she was still his wife, and he couldn't simply abandon her. During a private conversation with Prince William and Princess Catherine, the king wrestled with these personal and constitutional dilemmas. "Father," William said carefully, "the family will support whatever decision you make, but the public's trust in the monarchy must be our priority," Catherine added. "We understand this is incredibly difficult personally, but the institution has survived for centuries because it's proven capable of addressing serious problems decisively." King Charles appreciated their support, but the burden of choice remained his alone. Every option carried devastating consequences, and there were no precedents to guide him through this unprecedented crisis. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the full scope of Queen Camilla's activities might never be completely known. Some recipients might never come forward, some items might have been permanently lost, and some transactions might have been conducted through channels that left no records. The monarchy was facing not just a legal crisis, but a fundamental question about accountability and the rule of law. How the royal family handled this situation would define public perception of the institution for generations to come. Sir Marcus Whitmore worked tirelessly to coordinate all aspects of the crisis management, but even his considerable experience couldn't prepare him for the complexity of balancing legal requirements with constitutional stability. "We're walking a tightrope," he confided to Sir Edward during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Every decision we make could either save the monarchy or destroy it." The investigation was nearing its conclusion, but the most difficult phases still lay ahead. Formal charges, sentencing, and the long-term consequences for the royal family's reputation and future. 6 months after Thomas Mitchell first observed Queen Camilla with the ornate wooden jewelry box, the royal family faced the most significant crisis in modern British history. The investigation had concluded, charges had been filed, and the day of reckoning had finally arrived. Queen Camilla stood in a private courtroom at the Old Bailey, surrounded by the highest levels of security and legal expertise that the British justice system could provide. The proceedings were conducted under extraordinary secrecy provisions, with only essential personnel present and all participants bound by strict confidentiality agreements. The final tally was staggering. 43 items worth over £12 million had been removed from royal collections over a period of 18 months. While 31 items had been successfully recovered, 12 remained missing, either sold to unknown buyers or given to recipients who had not come forward. "Your Majesty," the judge addressed Queen Camilla with the respect due to her position while maintaining the gravity appropriate to the charges, "you have pleaded guilty to theft of items belonging to the Crown estate. Before sentencing, do you wish to make a statement?" Camilla rose slowly, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. The months of legal proceedings had taken their toll, but she maintained the composure expected of someone in her position. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, "I accept full responsibility for my actions. While I believed at the time that I was putting beautiful and historically significant objects to better use, I now understand that my intentions do not excuse the violations of law and trust that I committed." She paused, glancing briefly at King Charles, who sat in the gallery with his face etched in pain and resignation. I have caused immeasurable damage to an institution that has served this country for over 1,000 years, and I have betrayed the trust of the British people, who believed in the integrity of their royal family. No sentence this court could impose would be greater than the knowledge that my actions have harmed something far larger and more important than myself. The judge listened carefully before delivering a sentence that had been negotiated through months of unprecedented legal discussions between the Crown, Prosecution Service, the Palace, and constitutional experts. Queen Camilla, the judge pronounced, you are sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, suspended for 5 years, conditional upon your continued cooperation in recovery efforts and the performance of 500 hours of community service. Additionally, you will surrender all claims to any items from royal collections and submit to ongoing financial monitoring to ensure no additional violations occur. The sentence was simultaneously harsh and lenient. While Camilla would avoid actual imprisonment if she met the conditions, her conviction as a felon would forever change her status within the royal family and British society. King Charles felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness as the proceedings concluded. The woman he had loved and married was now a convicted criminal, and their life together would never be the same. In the months that followed, the royal family began the long process of rebuilding public trust. Queen Camilla's conviction remained officially secret, but rumors and speculation circulated widely throughout British society. The palace's response was to increase transparency in other areas, implementing new oversight procedures for all royal collections and establishing independent monitoring of royal household activities. Thomas Mitchell found himself in an unexpected position as the investigation concluded. His vigilance and integrity had been recognized at the highest levels, earning him a promotion to captain and assignment to a newly created position overseeing collection security. However, the recognition came with a burden he had never anticipated. You've done extraordinary service to the Crown, Sir Marcus told him during a private meeting, but I want you to understand that carrying this knowledge for the rest of your life will not be easy. There will be moments when you question whether you did the right thing. Thomas had already experienced many such moments. While he was proud of his professional conduct, he struggled with the human cost of his actions. He had helped expose and stop serious criminal activity, but he had also contributed to the destruction of a marriage and the tarnishing of an institution that millions of people revered. Sir, Thomas replied, I've thought about this every day since it began. I keep coming back to the same conclusion. We took an oath to protect the Crown and uphold the law. Sometimes that requires difficult choices. Margaret Thornfield faced her own complex emotions as she worked to restore and secure the recovered items. Each piece told a story not just of royal history, but of the violation of trust that had occurred under her watch. These objects have been through an ordeal, she explained to Sir Edward as they catalogued the returned items. Some have been damaged by improper handling. Others show signs of attempted cleaning or alteration. It will take years to fully restore them to their proper condition. The most challenging aspect of the recovery was dealing with the recipients who had received items in good faith. Many had formed emotional attachments to pieces they believed were legitimate gifts, and returning them caused genuine distress. Lady Pemberton's daughter was particularly affected. The pearl necklace had been a central element of her wedding, and learning it was stolen property cast a shadow over what should have been her happiest memories. I understand the legal requirements, she told palace officials when returning the necklace, but it's heartbreaking to discover that something so beautiful and meaningful was obtained through betrayal. King Charles made the difficult decision to personally reach out to key recipients, offering apologies and, in some cases, alternative gifts from his personal collection to acknowledge their innocence and distress. The constitutional implications of the crisis extended far beyond the immediate legal proceedings. Parliament quietly discussed new oversight mechanisms for royal collections, and several Republican movements seized on the scandal as evidence that the monarchy had outlived its usefulness. However, the royal family's handling of the crisis also earned unexpected respect from some quarters. The decision to pursue criminal charges against a family member, regardless of personal cost, demonstrated a commitment to the rule of law that strengthened rather than weakened the institution in many people's eyes. Prince William emerged as a key figure in the monarchy's recovery efforts, taking on additional responsibilities and working to rebuild public confidence. His public statements emphasized the family's commitment to accountability and transparency, while carefully avoiding direct reference to the scandal. The monarchy endures because it is capable of evolution and self-correction, he said during a carefully crafted speech. When mistakes are made, we address them. When laws are broken, we uphold justice. When trust is damaged, we work to earn it back. Queen Camilla's community service was performed at various charitable organizations, often in roles where her identity was not widely known. The irony was not lost on observers that she was now legitimately helping people in need after claiming that her theft had been motivated by charitable impulses. Her marriage to King Charles survived, but it was fundamentally changed. They maintained their public duties when appropriate, but the easy intimacy and partnership that had characterized their relationship was replaced by a more formal and careful dynamic. As the first anniversary of Thomas Mitchell's initial observation approached, the palace had implemented comprehensive new security protocols. Every item in royal collections was electronically monitored. Access was strictly controlled and recorded, and multiple oversight systems ensured that no individual could again single-handedly remove items without detection. The investigation had cost millions of pounds, created constitutional precedents that would be studied for generations, and permanently altered the British monarchy. But it had also demonstrated that the rule of law applied equally to everyone, regardless of their position or privilege. Thomas continued his duties with the knowledge that his vigilance had helped preserve invaluable pieces of British heritage and upheld principles that were larger than any individual. The burden of secrecy would remain with him forever, but so would the satisfaction of knowing he had done his duty when it mattered most. The royal collection, now more secure than ever, continued to serve its purpose as a repository of national heritage. Each piece carried not just the weight of history, but also the lesson that trust once broken could be rebuilt through accountability, transparency, and the unwavering application of justice.